everyone, and welcome to Preemie Chats. This is a place for healthcare professionals and parents to share, talk, and learn together. I'm your host for today, Jenna Morton. I'm a journalist living on the east coast of Canada, and I am the mom to twin boys who were born at 32 weeks. Preemie Chats is the creation of the Canadian Premature Babies Foundation, also known as CPBF. The foundation is a parent-led charity that helps families during and after their NICU time through education, support, and advocacy. Please take some time to visit the CPBF website, canadianpreemies.org. There you will find resources and links to all of our previous chats, our podcast, and so much more. And most importantly, you will find a community of people, parents and professionals who are working together to help our children thrive. Our comment sections are open. I can see a few folks dropping in already. Please take some time to let us know where you're watching from, where you're joining us, and feel free to share your stories and questions as we go through today. And today we are talking about ways to ease the somewhat tumultuous experience that many families will face during a NICU journey, that of transitioning between hospitals. Often, families are surprised to learn that their babies might have to spend time in more than one NICU, depending on the level of care that they require. So today, we're going to talk a little bit about why such moves are needed, some of the common changes that you might face moving from one NICU to another, but most importantly, we're going to touch on some practical suggestions to help everyone, baby, parents, family caregivers, as well as the healthcare team through this transition. And our guests joining us today for this topic have decades of experience helping with such transitions. I'm going to invite them onto the screen now. We have Heather Cresswell, who's joining us from Ontario. Heather is a neonatal nurse practitioner with more than 25 years experience. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
And we also have Sarah Gabriel joining us, who is a social worker helping preemie patients and their families also in Ontario. Welcome, Sarah.
Hi, guys.
Thank you so much for joining us today. I know you guys have worked together on a presentation to share with everyone about this very important topic that I know a lot of people are going to be very interested to learn more about. So I'm going to just turn the floor over to you and remind everyone that the comments are open. You can leave questions as we go, and we'll bring them up at the end of the talk.
Thanks, Jenna. Can you help us get that PowerPoint? There it is. So I'm Heather. So I'm a nurse practitioner in a level 2 NICU in the Toronto area. So I'm in Ontario. I've also worked in a level 3 NICU as well. So Sarah and I work together. Sarah's a social worker who works at the same level 2 center as I do. So we're going to talk to you about a really common occurrence, which is babies being transferred between neonatal units. I know that Jenna will probably put this website along the bottom as well during the presentation, but I just wanted to point out that a lot of the information we're going to talk about today is also on the website, the Canadian Premature Babies Foundation website, and it lives in the resources for the Education for Families section under the Living with the NICU tab, and there's a little QR code that you can go back in this presentation. I know it's going to live on YouTube and on the website and find that information as well. So you don't feel like if you heard something that you want to go back to, it's going to be there. So I wanted to talk a little bit about why babies might be transferred. Some people might not even be aware this happens. Maybe you've been in the NICU and this was not something that you had to experience, or maybe you're sitting in an NICU now and you don't know that this is a possibility that might be in your future. It might not be, but there are different levels of NICU care in Canada, and it varies a little bit by province. So you might find these parameters or these numbers might change a little bit depending on which province you're in or territory or which hospital you're in even. But generally, a common way to refer to NICUs is by level 1, level 2, or level 3. And sometimes it can be broken down even a little bit further within those levels. But a level 1 wouldn't even really be an NICU. It'd be usually a hospital where the babies stay in the room with mom So you have a healthy term or near-term baby who is born and is doing well and is able to just stay right in the room with mom and dad or caregivers. And then level 2 could be anywhere for babies born. I'm going to stick to talking about mostly premature babies, but between 30 and 35 weeks. There's lots of other reasons term babies might need the NICU, but we're going to stick to the premature baby for the purpose of this discussion. So some hospitals might be able to look after babies as small as 30 weeks gestation in their level 2 neonatal unit, and other hospitals might have more of a parameter like 34 weeks or above. It depends a little bit on the hospital and where you are. And then babies who are more premature than 30 weeks, so less than 30 weeks, or have more complex medical issues would need to go to a level 3 NICU. And those are your usually bigger NICUs. They're often sometimes in a children's hospital or a large medical center, and they can take care of basically the needs of any baby. So those are the different levels of NICU. And really what it all comes down to, the reason babies are transferred is because they are maybe in a unit and they need a different level of care. So a baby in a level 1 or level 2 unit that has a medical need or a complex medical need or needs resources that are not available at the level 1 or 2 center are going to move to a level 3 center. On the other side, if your baby is in a level 3 NICU, so a big medical center NICU usually, but they are doing well, they don't medically need to be in that level 3 unit anymore, they might be moved to a level 2 or level 1. Sometimes that's in the same hospital, but often it might be in a different hospital. So that's why babies are moved between NICUs. That's the underlying principle between it all, or behind it all. And usually the way we look at it, so I'm going to talk now, we're going to focus a lot on babies moving from the level 3 to the level 2. So babies who have needed a level 3 NICU for some reason, they were very premature or they were sick or they were born in a hospital that only had a level 3 and now they're doing better and they're ready to be moved to a level 2. So the most common way we look at it is those babies are actually ready to go to a hospital closer to their home. Often when you're in a level 3 NICU, Canada is a very large country and a lot of areas are quite remote. You're not going to necessarily have a level 3 NICU in your community. So the reason we want to move babies is usually to get closer to home, either physically or just in a unit that's going to be more equipped to prepare you to go home with your baby. And I want to talk a little bit about the good things about transfer. We're going to talk about why it's always hard to go through change and it's a stressful time. But there are some really good things about being transferred between units, especially when you're going from the level 3 towards the level 2 or the level 1. And usually the biggest and the primary reason we are moving babies is to get them a little bit closer to home. You might actually be a really far distance from your home if you're in a level 3 NICU. You might even be a plane ride or a very long drive away from the NICU, depending on where you live in Canada. So physically, we want to get your baby closer to home so you can be home within your community with your supports. There doesn't always work that way because there are some, if you're in a large urban center like Toronto, for example, there's many NICUs in the area. So it might just be that you're moving a 15 or 20-minute drive away to the next NICU to the level 2. So it might not physically be closer to home always, but that's usually what we're doing. Most of us in Canada don't live in a large center like Toronto. And also, you're going to get a little bit more used to having less technology in your baby's care. So sometimes we call that we're going to start letting your baby be more like a normal newborn. So as your baby progresses, they might in the level 2 start off on CPAP just like they were in the level 3 or sometimes even a ventilator. But as your baby progresses and gets better and more mature, they're not going to need the ventilator or the CPAP, usually the oxygen anymore, the IV pumps, the feeding pumps. Slowly over time, we're going to start taking all those away. And we kind of get baby and also the parents used to having a little less technology around them. So that's a really good progression towards home as well. And that makes it more like it will be at home. So we're also going to start taking some of the other things that your baby needed medically. Your baby might have needed extra medications, extra supplements, feeding tubes. All those things are slowly going to be going to be going away as your baby progresses, and your baby doesn't need those things anymore. So you start to see that we're going to start taking care of your baby more like it'll be when you take your baby home. So just feeding your baby without the feeding tube, giving the medications in their mouth instead of in a feeding tube, things like that. So you'll start to see more normal newborn things like that. And the other big benefit is that you might have a baby who has some ongoing medical needs, especially if you had a very premature baby. And part of the big thing that we do in a level 2 NICU is we start discharge planning and getting you ready to take your baby home and making sure all those plans for after your baby goes home are in place. So it's nice when those discharge plans can be made by somebody who actually works and lives in the community where you live, rather than somebody, I'm using Toronto just because I live in Ontario, but it could be any big city in Canada where your level 3 NICU is. If you're discharge planning for a town or a community that's hours away, they might actually not know who all the local resources are, where the early year center is, who the pediatricians are. So it's actually nice to have those discharge plans made by somebody who works in that community and really knows how to connect you with those local resources. So how would you know if your baby's going to be transferred? This will be an ongoing discussion with your NICU team. So if you have a baby who's in a level 3 NICU, let's say you have a baby who is born at 26 weeks or whatever it is, you're going to be there for a number of weeks. Your baby's team will be talking to you about this as your baby gets bigger and bigger. So it's going to be usually a conversation that you're going to have with your baby's nurses, your baby's nurse practitioner, neonatologist, or physicians, and they're going to talk to you about how your baby is progressing and when your baby is able to meet certain criteria, maybe is off the ventilator, already feeds, whatever it might be, usually at least 30 to 34 weeks or more, depending on which NICU you're going to be transferred to. They'll start to talk to you about your baby is going to be ready. And then how does it work? How does it work when babies are being transferred between NICUs, and will the new NICU know about your baby? So the way it works, first there's going to be some conversation in the unit where you are with your medical team, and they're going to identify that your baby is ready, your baby's progressed and is mature enough to be in a different NICU. So the medical team is going to have that conversation, and ultimately your baby's doctor will make that decision. And they will then probably talk to you about which hospitals are a good location for you. Sometimes there might be more than one choice, and they might reach out to one or more level 2 NICUs to let them know about your baby, let them know the medical needs of your baby, and then see where there is space. Sometimes we call that beds, see where there is beds. That just means they have space and they have enough nurses and resources to meet all your baby's needs. So that's the first step. And then once your level 3 NICU and the new NICU agree that there's an appropriate space for your baby, then what will happen is your baby's doctor or nurse practitioner will talk to the doctor or nurse practitioner at the receiving unit or the new NICU, and they'll talk about your baby. They give what's called a medical handover. So they go through everything that happened in your baby's life and everything that's coming up and everything your baby needs. That's called a medical handover, and the nurses will do the same. And then they'll just decide when the baby can be moved. The baby will go usually in an ambulance, depending on how far it is. It can also be done using an airplane if you are living far away from where your level 3 unit is. And your baby's nurse put the baby in what's called a transport isolette. So that's an incubator or an isolette that has all the technology your baby needs for the trip. And your baby's nurse will be with your baby the entire way, doing everything that he or she would be if the baby was in the NICU. So your baby's going to have a little traveling Neonatal Intensive Care Unit for the trip. Parents can often go with the baby as well too. That's something you should talk to your nurse about in advance if that's something that you would like to do. And how different will it be? This is going to be the hard part sometimes because it's going to feel different for sure. Anytime you go into a new environment, if you go on a trip and you get off out of your car in a new city, it's going to feel really different at first until you get used to it. So that can be one of the hardest things. So it will feel different, but you will you will get to know the new units. And the first thing to know is it's going to look different. Of course, no two units are identical, but there might be some big differences in physical layout. You might be going from a really big hospital to a really small hospital. You might have a single room in your level 3 NICU, and you might be going into a unit that has a different layout that's not a single room for the babies, but a big open area that the babies share with enough space between them. So there can be some physical differences. Some NICUs will have pictures on their website, so you might be able to look ahead and see if there's a picture of the NICU, so you get a little bit of a feel for it, or the hospital. You might be able to call the NICU where you're going to be going to get some directions. So where do I park and how do I find the NICU? But physically, it will be different. And one thing you might notice too is that the teams, they seem smaller. So level 3 NICUs are usually in big medical centers. They're usually teaching centers. So they have a lot more students, nursing students, occupational therapy students, medical students, doctors who are specializing. That's because they're usually affiliated directly with the university and a medical school. So some of the level 2 units don't have that same affiliation, and the team will seem a lot smaller, but all the people who you need to take care of your baby will be there. So your baby will have a nurse, your baby will have a doctor, and then before your baby has moved, your unit has already made sure that all the right people are at that unit. So if your baby needs an occupational therapist, there'll be an occupational therapist there. If your baby needs to have a dietitian, there will be a dietitian there. Some babies don't need that anymore, so they might be moved to a smaller unit where those aren't there, but the team will seem usually smaller when you first get there. And you might notice the nurses have more babies. So in the level 3 centers, usually the nurses might have 1 or 2 babies, where in the level 2, so in the level 3 centers, but in the level 2 centers, the baby might have more, 2 or 3 or more babies. And that's because the babies are doing better and they don't need the same level of attention usually. It doesn't mean that we're not paying attention or your baby's not getting what they need, but your nurse might have more babies to look after, and they'll work together as a team to make sure all the needs of the babies are met. The routines are often different. Again, sometimes the rounds will be at a different time. If you're used to rounds starting at 8:30, you can ask at your new unit. Maybe they're going to start at 9 o'clock, or maybe they're in the afternoon when the doctor's available. So all those things can be a little bit different. So those are things you can talk about with your baby's nurse when you arrive, or even before you arrive if you're able to. Sometimes there's less resources in terms of storage as well too. So one thing that's common is that the big level 3 NICUs will have big walk-in freezers and almost like milk banks where they can store as much breast milk as a mother wants. If you have a big milk supply, you might not be able to leave all of it in the level 2 NICU. They might ask you to take some of it home. So there might be some differences like that. And the other thing is that the visiting rules might be different. So we know that parents are not visitors. So I'm not talking about you parents when I say the word visitors. Parents are going to be welcome in the NICU anytime. But different units, especially since the pandemic came, have different rules about who else is allowed. If you're allowed to have grandparents in, if you're allowed to designate other visitors or not, if siblings are allowed to come in. So that is going to differ a little bit by hospital. So that is something you're going to want to ask when you arrive at your new units. Or beforehand, you can ask your level 3 nurse, do you know what the visiting policies are at this hospital we're going to? And I'm going to pass it over to Sarah now, and I'm going to mute, and Sarah's going to talk through some of the feelings that come with transfer. There's a lot usually.
Yes. Hi, everybody. So we talked a little bit about the transfer itself, and now I want to talk about the feels, because there are a lot of feels when it comes to a transfer. So we know that adjusting to a new NICU can be very difficult, especially once you've already settled in somewhere else. And we know that you've already gotten familiar with the hospital itself, the NICU itself, the team, and even the routine that you've built for yourself. And then all of a sudden, somebody mentions a transfer and you feel like your world is turning upside down all over again, right? So if you find that you are feeling stressed, anxious, worried, nervous, scared, tense, any of those feelings, please know that that's very normal and it's completely understandable, because it's a big change, right? And it's not only a big change for your little one, but it's also a big change for you. So in the next few slides, we'll be talking about some helpful tips with the transition. And Heather touched upon a few of them as well. So let's flip over to the next slide. And one of the things that you can do to ease the transition from a level 3 NICU to a level 2 NICU is to acknowledge that it's going to be different. It probably sounds really silly that I say that, but I say it because sometimes we fight or avoid the idea of change, which makes change harder to deal with. But if we acknowledge it and acknowledge that it's going to be different, then we can prepare for it. So just like Heather said, we know it's going to be a different setup. We know there's going to be new faces, and we know that there's going to be new changes as well, right? So think of it as a new chapter to your little one's story, right? Moving to a level 2 NICU is not all bad. It means that your baby is well enough to be in a level 2 NICU, which is a big deal, right? It also means that you're closer to home. And I know that despite all of this, change is still hard. And that's because our brains find comfort in the familiar. So when we hear that a change is coming, we find ourselves unsure of what to expect because all of what was familiar is now disappearing. So the uncertainty and the unknown are worrisome, and then that fuels those feelings of anxiety. So since we rarely sit well with the unknown, what you can do is to try and gather as much information as possible. And just like Heather said, the Canadian Premature Babies Foundation has some really, really good information on transferring to a different NICU. So it talks about the levels, it talks about why transfers happen, they even talk about a little like what to expect, right? Now, if you're looking for, just like Heather said, if you're looking for more details, such as maybe like a map of the hospital so you know where you're going in the first day, maybe parking information, visitor policies, that should be on the website. And if you don't find it, please call the level 2 NICU so that you have an idea, right? And then of course, as the days go by, you're gonna notice that things are the same, similar, or different. That's normal. Like we said earlier, things are going to be different because it's going to be a different NICU. If you notice something different, please ask the team. We don't want you to let it kind of bubble inside and hold on to it. We would rather that you talk to us about it and ask us about it so that we can explain to you what it is that we do and why is it that the way we do it. So now on the next slide, the next tip is to go easy on yourself. So Caroline Kennedy once said, change isn't easy. It takes time. So when you arrive, go easy on yourself. And what do I mean? Well, you can prioritize your baby and you can prioritize the basics. So where's my little one going to be? What can I bring? Where can I rest? Where can I get something to eat? You need to be realistic with yourself, especially on the first day, within the first few hours. So I tell all my mamas and all my parents to prioritize what needs to be done. So think of it as, what do I need to know today? What can be done tomorrow? And what can wait until later? And that'll help you figure out kind of what is it that I need to worry about today and what can I worry about a different day. You don't need to figure out everything in a day, right? And please, I always tell all of my families to give yourself compassion and to give yourself grace. It's a big change. So the same way that it took you some time to adjust to the level 3 NICU, it will naturally take you some time to adjust to the level 2 NICU. You just need to give yourself, like I said, some time to adjust, learn, and settle in for a bit. Now the next slide is talking about self-care. So self-care is anything that you do to take care of yourself mentally, emotionally, and physically. And it looks different for everybody. Some people enjoy going for walks. Some people enjoy reading a book. Some people enjoy calling a friend. It looks different for everybody. And you might be thinking, Sarah, I don't have time for this. But just as the quote says, taking care of yourself is part of taking care of your kids. Once our little ones are here, we often put ourselves on the back burner. We don't pay attention to ourselves or our needs. But it's important to look after ourselves so that we have the ability and energy to look after our little ones. And I always remind my NICU families, you were a person before you were a parent, meaning you have needs too. So the same way that we wouldn't expect our car to run without gas, the same way that we wouldn't expect our phone to work if we didn't charge it the night before, is the same way that I expect and I hope that you take care of yourself and give back to yourself a little bit. So let this be let this be a reminder for you to maybe schedule in some self-care and make time for you. And again, it looks very different. And what I mean by scheduling self-care is the same way that we schedule errands and appointments and follow-ups. And if you're like me, trips to Costco, it's important to schedule self-care. And you know what works for you. So if you're a morning person, you can schedule it then. If it works better in the evening, so you can wind down, then you can fit a little bit of time then. Self-care isn't meant to be complicated or fancy. It needs to be something that gives back into you a little bit so that it can help your energy, your mood, and much more. And now my final slide is an illustration by James Norbury, and it's from his book called Big Panda and Tiny Dragon. And the book tells a story about a big panda and a tiny dragon going through different seasons of the year. Some would even say they're different seasons of life. So the good, the bad, and the ugly. And my favorite story page is the one that you're seeing right now, where the big panda and the tiny dragon are sitting in the pouring rain. Now, I know the font can be a little bit small and fuzzy, so I'll read it for you. And it goes like this. Will it always be like this? Asked Tiny Dragon. No, said Big Panda. The clouds will pass, the storm will end, and the trees will lose their leaves. Change is one thing you can be certain of. So I'll end by saying that although change is scary and sometimes we can't avoid it, if we learn to look at it differently, it might not be such a bad thing. And please remind yourselves that you have navigated change before, whether it was a new job or moving cities or moving countries. So knowing that you've managed it before means that you can manage it again. This time around, it just might take a little bit of time, preparation, self-compassion, and self-care. Thank you.
Thanks, Sarah. I'm just going to wrap up now and then we can have some questions. Sorry, Jen, did you want to jump in?
No. Keep going. This is fantastic.
So thank you, Sarah. So, we talk a lot about the medical transition of things, and it's easy. I'm a nurse practitioner, so I take the medical letter and I decide when the baby's going to get the next head ultrasound and what medications do we start and stop. But often that stuff that Sarah was talking about, that emotional and mental transition is the biggest piece of moving NICU. So I really appreciate you joining, Sarah, and having that input. So just a couple slides to wrap up, and I'm going to put my notes aside now. Just I've been in a level 2 NICU for 12, maybe 13 years now. I've kind of lost track, and I think I've probably helped more than 1,000 families through this. And it is it's a change. It's a change, and it's an adjustment. And some families, everybody's I think grateful for the care the NICUs give, but a lot wish that they could have stayed in the place they were used to. So it's a bit of a transition, but we're going to help you through it. And that might take an hour, a day, or a lot longer, and that's okay. That's all normal. And we want you to know that you are the most important member of your baby's team. So that letter that I get from the doctor at the level 3 center is going to tell me everything about your baby's medical history and everything we need to do. But sometimes it doesn't tell me, is mom afraid, a little nervous to pick up her baby still because your baby was still small? So tell me that, or tell your team that if you're feeling nervous about holding your baby. Or maybe you're a mom who's been doing everything independently. You go in, you unhook your baby's the wires, you put them in the bathtub, and you feed them, and you do all that independently. Those are the kind of things we need your help telling us, so that we know kind of how you are in your journey in parenting an NICU baby, because sometimes it's hard to find that parenting role in the NICU, and that can be a bit of a process as well too. So if you let us know where you're at, let us know if you're feeling scared about holding your baby or anything else, or let us know if you've been doing it independently so that we can work with what you've already been doing. If you have certain routines with your baby, just let us know. We're really interested to know those kind of things, because those kind of things are hard to capture in the letters that come with the baby. And We use that term one step closer to home. I know they use it in the level 3s. I was a level 3 NICU NP as well too, to try to ease that and say it's an exciting time. You're going one step closer to home, and that's true. And it's really normal for that to come with a lot of mixed emotions and mixed feelings. There's really exciting things to come when you come to the level 2. We're going to be talking a lot more about going home, and we're going to be doing the discharge planning and all those things that come with us. But you still might be with us for weeks or months, so it's a journey. So we're going to be there with you every step of the way. So we just want you to know that. And he said, I would be stretched to think of a family that came and said, yay, we were transferred. It's really usually not what parents want. Of course, if you're very far from home, you might be really looking forward to it. And you might be looking forward to it and excited for the transfer, and also struggle with this transfer. And that's normal. So we just keep the lines of communication open, and we work together, and we'll get you transitioned, and we'll get your babies home. And I'm going to open it up now. Invite Jenna back in, and happy to answer any questions. And I'm just going to mute off and on because I think that's helping with the echo that we were having earlier.
There we go. Thank you so much to both of you for that presentation. I know there was so much fantastic information there for families who find themselves facing this idea of transition. I'm wondering, and maybe Sarah, you might be best to start to answer this one, for parents who are struggling to share how they're feeling with their healthcare team. How would you encourage a family who's facing this transition to reach out to their new healthcare team and to ask for some of these things to help ease the transition?
Right. So I think it's definitely not easy. When I talk to a lot of our parents, it's, well, I don't want to bug anyone. I don't want to bother anyone, right? But the reality is, if you don't ask, it's not going to be answered, right? And so sometimes our parents do need a push, right? And so you'll have some of the level 2 NICU asking them questions here and there. And I think it also falls back on, who do you feel safe talking to? Who have you built a rapport with? So maybe that starts with connecting with your partner, right? And doing it together. Maybe it means having grandma come in and help with those conversations, or a friend, right? It's not easy having to share so many details, and it's not easy feeling vulnerable and having to share your emotions, but it makes it a lot easier maybe when you have a support person with you, right? Or when you start to feel safe and familiar with the team, and then you get to pick and choose, right? Okay, maybe I'll talk to so-and-so about it, and they can share it with Heather, or they can share it with Sarah, right?
And I'm wondering, on the flip side of that, and Heather, maybe you can share some insight on this, for a healthcare team that wants to help ease that transition, but are struggling with how to, rather than, beyond just saying, I want to help you, what are some of those, actual tangible things that maybe a healthcare team can be doing to help with a family that's coming in transitioning?
Yeah, we're always looking to help, and there are still, to this day, sometimes where I don't always know how to best help a family, as hard as we try. So the first thing I think to any healthcare provider who might be watching this, I would say to ask the parents. They might not feel comfortable putting their hand up and saying, I need help or I'm struggling. So I usually, when I meet a family, I usually try to acknowledge, like, this is a really big change you've been through. Sometimes you might have been in that level 3 unit only for a couple of days, sometimes for many months, but even if it's only been a couple of days, I usually would start by saying, like, wow, you've been through a really big transition. It's a really big change. How are you doing? And try to open that door. Some parents might want to talk about it, some might not. And also to share the plans. So level 3 NICU sometimes have very specific medical plans for babies. You might have, the mother or your mom or dad might have heard them say 10 times in the last few days that we're going to do a head ultrasound next Wednesday. And then we have a head ultrasound scheduled for Thursday, and that might be confusing for parents and maybe worrisome, but so I try to have those conversations and tell them what's coming up and answer their questions about why things may be different. Usually it's just a different in scheduling or when the head ultrasound technicians are available in different centers. So there's usually a very good reason we might change things, or maybe the baby's just progressing along to the point where the medical plan is going to change. So So keeping the parents updated and then asking for, what are your questions? What's worrying you? And lots of times there's a lot of worry there that we didn't know about when you invite them to share that.
You talked a bit in your presentation about, families taking the time to familiarize themselves with the hospital that they're transitioning to, with finding, information about parking and, where you can get meals and those kind of things. Have you ever, as a NICU, created kind of like welcome packages that give that information to the families before they come? Because I know for me, it would be the overwhelm of trying to find that information would be part of the concern.
That's a really good question. And I think that's something else. If there's any NICUs out there who don't do this already, we do have a Welcome to the NICU booklet that we've shared with our level 3 partners. And have even done some joint work. For example, I'm in Toronto area. We're near Toronto, so we have had some direct communication or with the team from Sick Kids, which is one of our hospitals that we take babies from. We've done a lot of work so that we are in a lot of communication about babies that might need to be transferred here. And I know they have the information about our unit to give the parents. So sometimes you might, we have babies coming from 4 different level 3 NICUs. And other units might be in the similar position. So we try to have that information out there on websites. Not every NICU, especially smaller ones, might have that, like a website that has all that information. But there should be a phone number that you can get. And you could always call and just say, hey, my baby's coming there tonight or tomorrow morning. Can you tell me, where do I park? When can I come? Those kind of things.
Yeah, and like I said before, right? A lot of our parents feel like they want to figure everything out in a day, right? They want to figure everything out in advance, and that's okay, right? And that's normal because we want to make sure where we're going. We want to know what can we bring, what can we not bring. But like Heather said, absolutely, call us, right? And I know that I do my best to meet with our families to let them know this is what is available to you. This is what you are more than welcome to use or not use at your own pace and completely at your own choice, right? So we don't have like a specific document that says this is all the things that we have, because it changes every so often, but there are people that you can ask, and I know that social work does a lot of that stuff too.
I think just having parents hear again and again from professionals like both of you,
yeah,
please ask us. We want you to ask the question. I think there's still a lot of that barrier of parents feeling like they're not empowered to ask things. They don't know what to ask. And I think the more often that someone gently says, do you have any questions? What can I do to help? That just in and of itself will make such a difference for so many people. Well, I don't see any questions in the comments right now, so I think we're going to let you guys get back to your busy work days. But thank you again, both of you, for this information. I'm sure a lot of people are going to be coming back to this again and again over time as they realize that it's a situation they have to deal with. So thank you both.
Thank you for having us, Sarah.
And thank you, everyone, for joining and watching today, or if you're watching on the replay as well. I'd like to remind you that this episode and all the others that we've had with Preemie Chats are available on the Canadian Premature Babies website. You can find that by going to canadianpreemies.org. The website has many other resources that you can access as well. And there's also an option to donate to the charity if you are so inclined. We do appreciate all the support that's given to CPBF and its mission to empower families of premature babies along every step of their journey. And a reminder that we will be back here next week. Leah will be your host, and she's going to be discussing infections, antibiotics, and your baby. I wish you all a wonderful weekend. Thank you again.